Hello and welcome to another Standard Games video here on the official MTG Arena channel. Today we're taking a look at a green, red and white or a Naya colored elf deck, and it got a pretty nice upgrade in the latest expansion with Voja, Jaws of the Conclave, a 5-mana 5/5 legendary wolf. This is the only non-elf in the deck, has Vigilance, Trample and Ward 3, so it's pretty difficult for the opponent to profitably answer this on curve, unless they maybe have a board wipe on the following turn to clean things up. And then whenever Voja attacks, we get to put X +1/+1 counters on each creature we control, where X is the number of elves we control, and we also get to draw a card for each wolf we control. Now you could build this deck to have a few more wolves as well to draw more cards, but here we're focusing mainly on the +1 counters, as we're gonna try to fill the board with lots of cheap elves, maybe even get Voja in play ahead of schedule by ramping it out, and then on the following turn attack to get a ton of +1 counters, and hopefully close out the game in just 1 or 2 attacks. And then another payoff for playing an elf deck in Standard is Leaf Crowned Visionary, a 2-mana 1/1, giving other elves we control +1/+1, and whenever we cast an elf spell, we can pay a green mana. If we do, draw a card. And the cast part here of the ability is pretty relevant. If the opponent does have a counter spell, we still maybe get to play an elf and draw a card, even if that elf will get countered, so that can be pretty nice in those controlling matchups. And then speaking of counter spells, we also have 4 copies of Cavern of Souls in our mana base, and this will often name elf when it enters the battlefield, but on occasion we might want to name a wolf if we have Voja in hand and want to make sure it resolves. And then taking a look at the rest of our deck, we even have some 1-drops to potentially accelerate our mana, including 4 copies of the Sentinel Stalwart, a 1-mana 1/1 that needs to tap alongside another untapped artifact or creature we control, can then add 1 mana of any color, so it does also potentially synergize with the treasure tokens we get from Gala Greeters, as we can now also maybe tap those alongside the Stalwart to make mana instead of having to sacrifice them. And then we've got 4 copies of the Rustvine Cultivator, a 1/2 that can tap to get an oil counter, and we can remove an oil counter to untap target land, so every other turn this can add a mana for us, but it's just a cheap elf to try and get on the board. And then especially once we have a Visionary in play, it's nice to be able to play these 1-mana elves, and then essentially pay an extra mana to draw a card, quickly go through the deck, and then eventually find a critical mass of elves to take over, or ideally find Voja to eventually pump up the team. So the more cheap elves we have on the battlefield, the better. And then another way to try and find or key win conditions is Fauna Shaman, a 2-mana 2/2 elf, can pay a green, tap it, and to discard a creature card to search our library for any creature, reveal it, and put it into our hand. So this will often find a copy of Voja if we don't have one already, but finding a Visionary could also be a legitimate play, or maybe we need some removal, in which case we can search up our Werefox Bodyguard, a 3-mana 2/2 elf Fox Knight with Flash, and then when it enters the battlefield we get to exile up to 1 other target non-Fox creature until the bodyguard leaves the battlefield, and then if the opponent does try and remove it and we have 1 and a white available, we can also sacrifice it to gain 2 life, so that's a nice little upside. Now I did try to build an elf deck before the release of MKM on Arena, and then one of the main payoffs was Roaming Throne, which has excellent synergy with the bodyguard, as you can potentially exile 2 creatures with it, but otherwise the elf deck was kind of light on triggered abilities that we could double with the Roaming Throne. Visionary is potentially one of them, but we do still have to pay an extra green mana for each one of those triggers, so it wasn't all that amazing necessarily. So in this build I'm omitting Roaming Throne, but it is an interesting card to consider at the very least. And then another way to speed up our mana production is with a Loam Speaker, can make a mana of any color, can also be useful to fix our colors, because if we do have, let's say, a Cavern of Souls naming Elf, then we may not have the red mana or the white mana to cast Voja as a wolf, so then the mana fixing from Loam Speaker or Stalwart can also come in handy. And then a Gala Greeters we already mentioned can also be a source of treasure tokens when we play our creatures, so that's often the mode we're going to choose early on to help us deploy the rest of our hand, and then we can also maybe start gaining life or getting more +1 counters if we get multiple creatures in play at once. And then by playing the bodyguard in the opponent's turn, we can also maybe trigger Greeters in the opponent's turn once again to get 2 treasure tokens in 1 turn cycle. And then we've got 2 copies of Gwenna, which is also quite synergistic with Voja. As a 2/3 elf, it can tap to add 2 mana in any combination of colors that we can only spend to cast creature spells or activate abilities of creature sources. And whenever we cast a creature with power 5 or greater, we can put a +1/+1 counter on Gwenna and untap it. So turn 3 Gwenna can set up turn 4 Voja, and then also untap our Gwenna and put a +1 counter on it, so we can maybe deploy even more creature spells to set up a devastating attack on the following turn. But even without Voja, the ability to make 2 mana still pretty useful, especially for drawing a bunch of cards with a Visionary. Now do keep in mind, you cannot use the mana from Cavern of Souls to pay the green ability on Leafcrown Visionary to draw a card, so ideally use Cavern of Souls to cast a creature spell and then still have a green mana to use the ability on Visionary and draw a card. And then at 4 mana, we've got 4 copies of Fleetfoot Dancer, 4/4 with Trample, a Lifelink, and Haste. A Hasty Elf is quite nice in combination with Voja, since we can play Voja on turn 4, and then at turn 5, before attacking, play a Hasty Dancer, so it can immediately get a nice attack in and receive a ton of +1 counters, but otherwise we can always just deploy all our other elves before attacking, so we get even more +1 counters out of it. But with Dancer, we'll get a huge trampling, a life-linking threat, so this is excellent when facing any of the aggressive decks in the meta, especially in best of 1 against decks like Mono Red Aggro or the Red-White Convoke deck, which tends to have lots of chump blockers. Having these top-end threats with Trample is pretty important. And then our mana base has a pretty wide range of dual lands. We want kind of a mix of lands that enter untapped early on, like the fast lands, Copperline Gorge. We've got the Pain lands, Carplusan Forest, and then the same in white with Brushland and the Razorverge Thicket. But we also don't want to play too many of these, otherwise we end up taking too much damage against aggro, or risk having these lands enter tapped later when we need to cast our more expensive spells. So I'm still kind of prioritizing Rockfall Vale and the Overgrown Farmland as lands that enter untapped later in the game. And then we also have some basic forests in case we need to search those up. And then one of Boseiju as a channel land can also come in handy if we need to destroy an enchantment. The temporary lockdown is pretty popular right now because of the presence of those red-white Convoke decks that make a lot of cheap tokens and other permanents, so having Boseiju as an answer can also be quite relevant. And then I'm also playing a one-off Restless Prairie. Now it's difficult to fit in a lot of tapped creature lands in the mana base, especially in a fast format, but Restless Prairie is quite synergistic in a deck that puts a lot of cheap creatures on the battlefield, as we can animate it and make a 3/3 creature that will give our other creatures +1/+1 when it attacks, so that can also help close out the game for us. So yeah, that's our deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Okay, we're on the play with a keepable hand. We've got a turn 2 Gala Greeters, make a treasure when playing Visionary, or we can play Visionary, draw a card when playing Gala Greeters. But we'll see what we're up against. Turn 1 Mountain Epicure, so more likely to be the red-white Convoke deck, which doesn't play much removal. Now that being said, I guess the goal is still to get Voja in play as soon as possible, so I prefer Gala Greeters, make a treasure next turn, as opposed to drawing a card with Visionary. And then turn 4 we could play Voja. Alright, Reckless Impulse, maybe pointing towards Mono Red anyways. So yeah, stick to the plan. Mono Red's gonna have a hard time answering a 5/5 with Ward 3. So unless they have maybe Witchstalker Frenzy, they wouldn't be able to take it out. Chandra makes a mana, so we could see a burn spell. No, just another Epicure. That's fine. Time to play Voja. Even though Fleetfoot Dancer would also be pretty strong here. Can play that next turn. And for now, +1 counter is reasonable. Go after Chandra. Could also start gaining life. Let's go for a +1 counter still. Send that at Chandra.
You wanna dance? Then let's dance.
A Visionary may not be long for the world. Mechanized Warfare is a good one. And a Lightning Strike takes out Gala Greeters. Okay, time to play Cavern, Fleetfoot Dancer, draw a card, and time to smash. Can send maybe the Fleetfoot at Chandra, the rest goes face. They can double block Visionary to trade, that's fine. Back up to 21. And it's not gonna get any better for them. Even with a card like End the Festivities, which is typically good against a go-wide creature deck, they only deal 2 damage with the Warfare, which is still pretty far from taking anything out. Kumano deals 2, and we get to untap and attack for the win. Sweet, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, and our hand's not perfect. Could use an extra land or 2, but it's functional. Especially if we find a second white source, which we just did. Okay, so play Prairie, turn 2 Greeters. Turn 3 we could play Fauna Shaman, or maybe Bodyguard. Against black-green, maybe Golgari midrange. We can expect a lot of removal, so it's going to be tricky to keep our key threats on the battlefield. And a Deep Cavern Bat's going to have a look. At least we've got two drops to potentially choose from, so they can't disrupt our curve too much. And then we gotta hope they don't have something like a Glissa, since that's gonna make it very difficult for us to attack. So we'll stick to the plan, play Fauna Shaman. Could also activate it next turn, get a 2-drop and still play it. Edict will take care of it. Okay, found another Gala Greeters. Yeah, can play that for now over Bodyguard. And we'll see if they have a blocker for Fleetfoot Dancer lined up. Shieldred would also be pretty good. And yeah, speak of the devil. So, since Fleetfoot Dancer doesn't line up, we may as well play the Bodyguard. And then don't really need a treasure, so we could go for a +1 counter here. And a Visionary's next. Okay. Can name Elf. And head for 2. Now, of course, they're likely gonna have an answer to the Bodyguard, so this is only a temporary solution. But now with the Visionary, the Dancer could maybe attack for 5. So in hindsight, maybe regretting not making a treasure, so we could cast both the next turn. And Dread Knight is acceptable. Okay, so probably for now just playing a Fleetfoot. And then now I think I make a treasure since we can use the extra mana. And it's not like a +1 counter lets me attack past the Dread Knight. So for now we got to keep our Bodyguard, but we'll see for how long. Possible they have some board wipe at 5 mana. Also can't forget about our Restless Prairie, which can maybe turn into a creature and pump the team. Opponent goes all out, we'll take it. If we knew for a fact that they had a board wipe, we could have potentially blocked with a Bodyguard, they get shielded back, and then a board wipe doesn't look as good. But then they probably wouldn't cast it. And I guess we would also get our Gala Greeters back at least. Just double underdog for now, that's acceptable. Okay, so we could play a Leafground Visionary, play Boseiju, and then play Dancer, and then still draw. And then here, probably gonna end up making a treasure and getting a +1 counter. Okay, so we got a pair of 5/5s. And we'll send in Fleetfoots and Gala Greeters. Could see them double block a Fleetfoot, or maybe just double block a Gala Greeters. Okay, fair enough. Opponent takes 10 down to 7. Opponent did get to 5 mana, so we'll see if they have some sort of board wipe. Might be a Gixis command, which right now could answer 1 Fleetfoot Dancer and a Visionary. Alright, just a Preacher, 2/4 Death Touch. And the bat keeps attacking. Okay, since we didn't draw anything useful, I think we're just gonna fire up the Restless Prairie. And see if we get to attack. And then, if I were to attack all out and our opponent has removal for Leafcrown Visionary, then Bodyguard shrinks down, they get a profitable block with Preacher, but then Double Dancer should still get there. So I think we can go all out here. Blocks happen. So now even if they have spot removal for Fleetfoot Dancer, they would still take 8, thanks to the trample. Alright, looks like they didn't have it. And we get there, awesome. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw. This looks like a keeper. It's not perfect with our lands entering tapped. But with Visionary, sometimes it's better to hold a card like Stalwart until after we deploy Visionary, so we can draw a card off of it. Even though curving Stalwart into Visionary could set up a turn 3 Fleetfoot Dancer. But maybe we'll play the long game where we get more value out of our Visionaries. Opponent's blue-whites, and now with the Forest we can play Stalwart on 1. Which, yeah, I guess is reasonable. Okay, found our Jaws of the Conclave. Play Visionary. This might get countered. And if our opponent's playing a dedicated control deck, of course board wipes are going to be a major problem. No more lies for now. And yeah, can just replay Visionary. And attack for 2 now. Opponent looking at their Field of Ruin. And we do not have a basic mountain to search up, unfortunately. Do have one more forest. Now we can still play the Fleetfoot Dancer thanks to the Stalwart. And that might be the plan, draw a card with Visionary as well. As opposed to playing Jaws of the Conclave. This is a bit better in the face of a counterspell. Now they could also have a Wandering Emperor, which lines up pretty well against the Fleetfoot Dancer. But I'm still gonna attack. Right, Dissipate will counter it, but at least we got to draw our card. Now if we lose our 2 creatures, we won't be able to cast any of our spells, as a Jace shows up. That's fine. So we'll do this again. Draw a card, try and hit our land drop, and hit Jace for 5. Okay, so not opposed to playing a few creatures and drawing a few cards, as opposed to playing Voja, which is not going to line up all that well in the face of a sweeper, although either way it's going to hurt. But yeah, let's start maybe with Stalwart, draw a card. Find Loam Speaker. So I could play a Loam Speaker, draw a card, and then still attack with both Dancer and Visionary. Sure. And found a Cavern of Souls, that's useful. Okay, so let's go ahead and attack. Dancer at Jace, Visionary can go face, although if they have Emperor, they can make a Samurai to get in the way of Visionary, so that would be bad. So maybe it's just Dancer at Jace and that's it. And then brace for a sweeper next turn, pretty much. I have to play this now, and actually have to make a decision whether to play Cavern naming Wolf or naming Elf. Probably name Wolf at this point. Alright, so we'll see what they have. End of turn Deluge is problematic. So yeah, Sunfall seems pretty likely now. So we get to untap, play Voja. And then, yeah, hope to find a red source for Fleetfoot Dancer. So we can get a nice attack in. Voja, good against spot removal, not so good against sweepers, so hopefully we can at least get rid of one now. But this was always going to be a tricky matchup if our opponents can enact their game plan. Now if they don't have a sweeper, they're going to take a lot of damage next turn. And this Deluge seems to be a tough decision. So maybe they didn't find exactly what they were looking for. Okay, let's see what's next. Temporary lockdown, so it does not hit our Fleetfoot Dancer at least. And get to untap, found a red source. So now we could also play Fleetfoot Dancer plus a 2-drop. But I think I still like Voja. So if we play this now, it's still not gonna trigger, so may as well get in. Faithful Mending now, setting up their graveyard. Could see the Teresian Mindbreaker to try and mill us alongside Jace. Nope, just 2 counter spells discarded. Now that we have Cavern, they don't look quite as good. And a Farewell, that's too bad, so they had another board wipe. But we can get back on the board. Voja plus maybe Fauna Shaman. If they answer Voja, we can get another one. And get to untap. And at least Voja has Vigilance, so that's pretty good against a Wandering Emperor. Could also just deploy both creatures here and attack, which is maybe the way to go. Even though if they have an answer to one of my key creatures, I wouldn't be able to discard and get a replacement. But we'll start with the Fleetfoot Dancer, since we can still pay for No More Lies. And then play Loam Speaker, I guess. That resolves. Play Loam Speaker. And attack. Get to draw Voja. And we'll get a bunch of +1 counters. So technically an attack for lethal, but I imagine our opponent's got some interaction here. At least they won't be able to take their turn to flashback Deluge. So there's Wandering Emperor, can exile Fleetfoot Dancer. Goes for Fauna Shaman. Interesting, so they might have some spot removal as well. Just a flashback Mending to stay alive. Alright, so they fall to 4. And then Bodyguard we can flash in as an end-of-turn threat, but hopefully they don't have another sweeper. Faithful Mending, so they don't have it yet. And our opponent explodes, awesome! So managed to even beat blue-white control, and it's not like they were lacking board wipes. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play. This hand is a little bit too clunky with 2 tap lands. Although it is kind of tempting because we have Gwenna into Voja on the following turn if things work out. So we really just need one more land, and ideally one that enters untapped on turn 2 to play Gala-Greeters. And then this hand is actually pretty awesome. Alright, let's risk it. Alright, found our red mana, although it's gonna be tapped. And our opponent's on mono blue, so things resolving might be tricky. So I think we go Gala-Greeters plus Cultivator as opposed to just tapping out for Gwenna, so we can at least make a little bit of progress. That's gonna get countered. Okay, so mono blue, finding Cavern of Souls is gonna be key to make our stuff uncounterable. And then, yeah, getting on the board quickly is also important. Well, speak of the devil. Now, whether we name Wolf or Elf is another interesting question. Probably go for Wolf, since resolving Voja is kind of our game plan. And then for now, I guess just play Gwenna. And that's likely getting countered. Cultivator can get an oil counter. Alright. And pass it back. Now they can still bounce this once in play, but it's still going to cost them a lot of mana. Haughty is a concern since that can close out the game in a hurry. And could also trade for Voja. Fleetfoot Dancer. Yeah, we'll stick to the plan here. So, make a mana. Untap. Play Voja. They cannot bounce at end of turn, so they need to untap first. And there's a Fading Hope. Well, at least it's going to eat up most of their turn. And hopefully we draw land so we can just replay it immediately. But no, opponent explodes, so Voja is eventually going to resolve, and then I guess it's just too much for the mono-blue deck to handle. Awesome. Well, we got to showcase the deck in a pretty nice variety of matchups. The ladder has been filled with a lot of mono-reds and red-white Convoke lately, but we got a nice bit of variety, facing aggro, mid-range, control, and then mono-blue could be classified as a tempo deck, although it's pretty controlling in nature. So yeah, the Elf deck definitely performed and showcases the power of Voja. If we get to untap with it, it's often going to be game over, although as we saw against blue-white control, board wipes are certainly an issue, so having some hasty threats like the Fleetfoot Dancer, which also helps against aggro, is very nice. Some creature lands can also help, and then a Cavern of Souls can also help out against counter spells. So the deck has a lot of different angles of attack, even though it's still kind of a creature deck trying to play to the board, but as you could see from the games, hopefully, we do still have quite a few decisions to make along the way, so it's not your straightforward creature aggro deck. So that'll do it for today's gameplay. Want to thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.